Shalom and welcome to Education in Time of War. I'm Rachel Raz, in conversation with Dr. Jonathan Golden, founder of the HeartStance Education Consulting. And I'm delighted to welcome you all today to a conversation about the impact of the war in education. And for those of you joining us for the first time, we're referring to the war that started in Israel on October 7, 2023, with the invasion of Hamas to Israel and the killing of over 1,200 people and the kidnapping of 250 citizens. Unfortunately, today is the 408 days since this beginning of the war. I thought that we will stop recording this conversation, but unfortunately, the impact on all of this region with many other countries involved and so many people suffer. And today we're actually sitting very far away. We are talking about the impact of this war on the United States. And again, I'm delighted to have Jonathan with me. Jonathan, we met several years ago when you worked at Gan Academy in the Boston area. And before you start, maybe you can share a little bit about your background and what you're bringing and what the listener will learn from you.
Thank you so much for having me. So I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, an hour west of Boston. Went to Princeton University as an undergraduate where I studied American history, but also became certified to teach public school, high school social studies. And I did student teaching as a senior while at Princeton. Everyone at Princeton writes a senior thesis, and I chose to write about the education of Russian Jewish immigrants in the Boston public schools, 1900 to 1930, the world of my grandparents and great-grandparents. In many ways, I wanted to investigate my own family story. And I think what inspired me to do that were my 13 summers at Camp Yavne, where I was both a camper and a counselor. And I always wondered, why couldn't the magic of camp, those 2 months, be the rest of the year in terms of Jewish life, Jewish living, and Jewish learning? That inspired me to do a master's in Jewish education at Hebrew College, and then a PhD at Brandeis in American Jewish history with Jonathan Sarna, where I looked at issues of Jewish pluralism, in particular an organization called the Synagogue Council of America that brought together the Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox movements, founded in the 20s, but fell apart in the 90s. And I looked at, why was this organization created? Where did it successfully bring everybody together? Why did it fall apart? And what can we learn from that? And as I was doing that dissertation research, Professor Sarna was the founder of a new school, then called the New Jewish High School, now Gan Academy. And he said, we need a part-time American history teacher. And given your background, I think you'd be a good fit. I think you should work there at least for a few years. And I thought that was a good idea as I was working on my dissertation and given my background with the teaching certification, having worked at Yavne. And pretty quickly, 3 years or so became 23 years, where I was a part-time teacher, full-time history teacher, then history department chair, assistant head of school. And my last 8 years at Gan, I was the Israel curriculum coordinator. And that's the time in which you and I met, Rachel. And what brought me to that work was actually the lens of pluralism. This was after the summer of 2014, Operation Protective Edge, Tzuk Eitan in Hebrew, where Israel and Hamas had another war. And our head of the school at the time, Rabbi Mark Baker, said, I think we need to think anew about how we're teaching about Israel. He noticed that an issue that once brought everyone together had become divisive in the American Jewish community. People had different political stances and points of view, and asked me, as well as some of my colleagues, how can we think anew about Israel education? And we were given an incredible gift to meet as a staff, half Israelis, half Americans, once a week for an hour and a half for 9 months to figure out what goals were going to make sense for Israel education. And we figured out that those goals would be connection, knowledge, and stance. By connection, not just connecting students to how they felt about Israel, but realizing that so many of our students had never been to Israel or even knew an Israeli. What could we do as a school to connect them there? And what story would they tell that would relate to their connection to Israel? Secondly, we wanted to focus on knowledge, not just to learn more, but really to focus on the questions that students had. Were they interested in politics or religion or startup nation and technology when it came to Israel or culture? And finally, this idea of stance. How would students figure out how they wanted to act and be in the world based upon their connections and their knowledge? So it was really inspiring work. And I think back fondly to the conference we had a chance to do together about the multi-dimensions of Israel and ways in which we could connect to students in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and this is, way before this war. And as you mentioned, the conflict is not something new. It's something that from the inception, from the beginning of the state, and even before that. Like, my father was born in Palestine under the British Mandate in 1936. In 1936, there was the Pa'ot, there was already riots. So it's nothing new. I recently wrote his biography, and we spoke about this time period, and that's something, it's nothing new. It's like always this like fighting in the region, which is unfortunate. And yes, you mentioned this conference that you met, because I found the same thing that you kind of sense in your school, that we need to give better education. And when I was working at Hebrew College and I was the chair of the conference, I realized that many educators didn't know how to speak about Israel or how to teach about Israel. And I said, like, okay, so it's mean that we need to learn. We need to sit together. And this is where we started the multiple dimension of Israel, because there are many different things that we can teach and connect to religiously, historically, in many different ways. And later on, actually, thanks to you, when we wrote this survey, what do you want to do next after? It was actually you that says it would be great to have a community of practice. And this is where we started this community of practice in the Boston area, with educators working from preschool to college campus, and scholar also meeting together, every couple of months, and learning from each other, which was very successful, and I think much needed. And maybe we can revisit it because we definitely need it. So teaching about Israel, it's not something new. The conflict is not something new. But something did change after October 7, at least the way you are doing, or maybe your approach to teaching it. So maybe you can share a few words about what changed on October 7, or.
I remember waking up the morning of October 7th. I was at my in-laws' place in Florida, watching the terrible news unfolding in Israel, in realizing that I could not have a community of practice at that moment, because it was Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah here in the United States. And I was working for the Hartman Institute, where people were observant. I would not have the opportunity to speak to my colleagues for 48 hours. And I was really struggling, because my role at the time was to work with all the day schools, summer camps, and congregational schools across the United States and Canada. And I thought to myself, what could I give to these schools? What do I have that could support them in any way through this time? And it was really a sleepless 2 nights, those first 2 nights, just trying to think of all that I had done in my career, all that I had learned, what could I give to them? Then when I woke up October 9th, I had a flashback to a moment when I was an American history teacher at Gann Academy, in a lesson I taught the day after the November 2016 election, where that night I was thinking, I'd love to talk about elections with my students, but I'll walk into a classroom the next day where many will be sad that Hillary Clinton had lost. Some will be happy that Donald Trump won. How could I have a discussion with everyone? And it came to me at 3 a.m. So I walk into the classroom the next day, and I wrote on the board, heart, how do I feel? And then head, what do I want to know? And hand, what might I want to do? I gave the students markers and said, write all of your feelings, all of your questions, and what you want to do. In less than 10 minutes, the board was filled with their ideas. I put them in a circle and I said, I'm your history teacher, so my job is to focus mostly on the head column, the questions that you have. But there's no way I can do the discussion today if I don't know what's in your heart and what you want to do with your hands. More importantly, you need to see the diversity of feelings and questions on this board. And it was the most meaningful, best discussion I did in my 23 years at Gann. I used it again after the Parkland school shootings from Florida to talk about gun violence, the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court hearings and the Me Too movement, the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I woke up October 9th thinking, maybe there's something about heart, head, hand in this kind of conversation that can help schools and camps and other Jewish institutions, synagogues, process this moment. So I decided to write a very brief Facebook post about it, what I was thinking about, what I was planning to do. And within a couple of hours, it went viral. I had people texting me, that looks incredible. Can you do this for us? Can you share your materials? How does it work? And for 3.5 months, I was flying across the United States, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Detroit, New York, Los Angeles, many places, schools, sometimes working with camps in person or virtually, synagogues, students, parents, teachers, heads of school, camp directors, all kinds of professionals, using heart, head, hand for them to process and think about what were not only their feelings, but their personal connections to that moment. What is it that they wanted to know personally, but professionally to move their institutions forward? And what were they going to do in the aftermath of October 7th? So I found that work very meaningful. And that is that work that also led to ultimately my founding of HeartStance Education Consulting, where I bring together those pairs of glasses of both heart, head, hand, and connection knowledge stance to help institutions think about how they're feeling, experiencing a moment, what they want to know, and what they want to do going forward.
Yes, so you mentioned that most of your work was mostly with like Jewish school. And for those that are not Jewish listening, and it's like, why do even Jewish school bother with Israel? You know, that's all a big conversation at all. You know, the connection, the relationship that the Jewish people have with the land of Israel from biblical time, historical time, and even the day-to-day practice, like observant Jews, we pray to the direction of Jerusalem. Our holidays are based on the season in the land of Israel. So many connections. So that's why Israel, the land of Israel, is a very important piece in Jewish identity, I would say. And also, and you correct me if maybe there's a different way to describe it, but definitely since the establishment of the new state of Israel, definitely this different connection, because it's the only Jewish state in the world that go by the Jewish calendar with the Hebrew language, that teaches Jewish history as part of the school. And all of that. So Jewish school have a very strong, or Jewish community have connection with Israel, which is part of that. But it impacted not just the Jewish school, because, for example, there are Jewish students that go to public school, and unfortunately, you know, what the war that is going on very far away had its impact also here. So did you do anything also with the public schools or with the more diverse community, or rather just the diversity of the Jewish community? And if you can share with us.
Sure. What's interesting is a few of my first public programs, one was with a private school and one was with my son's public school. And I'll describe both. The first was the Brimmer May School in Chestnut Hill, which has a diverse population, some Jewish students, but also Christian and Muslim students, Israeli, Palestinian students of that background. And I met with the middle school and the high school and decided to do the same heart, head, hand conversation. And the way in which that begins is that I set up the conversation. Here's the prompt. What does this moment mean for you? Everyone gets Post-its and they write a note of either a feeling they have or a connection they have to the story in the heart column. They write another Post-it with a question that they have. And then the hand, things they're thinking about doing. So I had the students first write the Post-it, and it was incredible to see what they shared. I used that as a basis for my questions and answer conversation with the group. And what I could tell is at first, it was mostly the Jewish students who were asking the questions, which made sense. And someone had said to me before, really glad you're here. We felt a little bit alone and we wanted someone who understood what we're going through to be able to share the entire school community. So that was answering their questions and about the war and some about the history and what it meant. Towards the end of the question and answer session, a young Muslim boy said, Dr. Golden, thank you for what you shared about Israeli history, what it means to the Jewish community. But what about the Nakba, which is what Palestinians referred to in 1948 as their catastrophe? What about the Six-Day War, what it meant for the Palestinian community? And I was glad the student asked the question because it gave an opportunity just to say, I hear you, and here's some stories that I know. And that's largely from my experience going on encounter trips, an organization that brings American Jews to meet with Palestinians. So I've been to Ramallah, East Jerusalem, Bethlehem. I've been through checkpoints. I've been to refugee camps. And I was able to say, well, here's my understanding of the Palestinian narrative. And here's how Israelis see each of those moments and how the Jewish community sees those moments. Let's think together. And it was a nice way actually to close the assembly to say, we need to hear and understand one another's stories as a starting point, and then figure out how we work together in a world that is complex. And I think the students really heard that. And relatedly, about 10 days after October 7th, at my son's public school, the Parent Teachers Association said, could you please do a listening circle for the parents? Knowing that we have Israeli parents in our school and Jewish parents with connections, but we also have Muslim parents in our school, including one of my son's classmates who the mother was born in Egypt and came to Brooklyn via Germany. So after doing heart, head, hand with them, a common question I would ask in those first few months after October 7th was, tell me someone you're thinking about today. And people would mention a family member, a friend. It could have been a camp counselor for camp, a tour guide. And so certainly the Israeli families had direct connections. They shared a story or two of who was meaningful to them. And my son's friend, who was Egyptian born, talked about people she knew in Gaza. And again, it was this humanizing moment just to say, let's, before jumping in to debating politics or understanding Israel, let's just figure out where are we all starting from in this conversation? What connects us to it? And so I have found that work very meaningful. And I have continued to be involved in conversations in the Boston community and beyond about what is the role, particularly of K-12 public schools, which are all trying to figure out, how do we teach about this topic? How do we talk about anti-Semitism, Jewish identity, Jewish history at all, where it makes sense? And I have found in speaking to them, they have found this idea of the personal storytelling, compelling, the heart idea, as a way to build the trust, to then open to talk about the issues that are more complex.
And I think in general, I love the heart, head, hand, because very time we live parallel. We live in America. It's a country of immigrant. Everybody has a story. Sometimes the story become like a central story, because when the Russian-Ukrainian war started, I didn't see anything like this as much like affecting the public schools. Like now the war in Gaza. When things are happening like in Sudan or Syria or other places, I didn't see it impacting. Maybe the election, it depends, what is it? But I think this approach of, first of all, the heart, to connect with human beings, and it's not just like academic, but also the fact that you're empowering them. It's like what we are doing, it's very, very important. So I think in general, it would be great. One of my realization actually after October 7 is also to be more involved with not just the Jewish world, but to become more involved also with the American community in general. In regard to our story as Jewish story, we're only 2% of the population. Most people don't really met a Jew or don't know much about Judaism. So I think to be out there and have it as part of a conversation is very important. And I hope that the school will create more opportunities to bring it and to discuss it. So as I know, Jonathan, you have a PhD, you learn and all of that. You could have also become a professor at the university, but you chose high school. Why? What was it? There was a passion, some thinking behind it. It's the heart, the head, or what was it in your case?
It's a great question. Well, first of all, the joke I used to tell is I was in school since age 3, straight from then until almost a couple of years ago, between elementary, middle, high school, graduate degrees, and then working in high school for a long time. So why did I choose that? When I was looking at PhD programs, the most important thing to choose when choosing a PhD program is an advisor. And what impressed me about my opening conversation with Jonathan Sarna, not just that he's a brilliant man, but he said, I see what you've done with your career, and I see you have a variety of interests. I certainly could see you have an academic career, but I see you have this real passion for teaching, and particularly he knew about my high school experience, my camp experience. And he said, as you think about your career, you should think about where your heart is and where you do feel that you can contribute the best, which I need to say is an unusual answer for many people to do a PhD. The expectation is, of course, you're going to go on for a college degree, to work in the college field, to be a professor, to do academia. But he was open to that from the start. And I did find as I went along, like, yes, I think this is what I want to do. And especially since he connected me to the school, a school that was only in its 3rd year when I started, it was just incredibly exciting to be part of a new school that was very much a laboratory and an experiment. And when the school was founded, the best-selling book in the Jewish world was Jew versus Jew, how it's impossible for Jew, Reform and Orthodox Jews to get along with one another. And it told story after story, and a very pessimistic story of how they could get along. And schools like GAN, then the New Jewish High School, it was not the only one founded in the country. A lot of these community pluralistic high schools were founded in the 90s. And I think there were experiments to fight against that thesis, to say, we're going to prove, maybe at a small level, with students, that we actually can have a world where we all can learn from one another, work together, and be together in a school community. And so I found that so inspiring, where again, at certain points, I thought, oh, again, I'll just stay for a couple of years. But as the time went on, the ability to impact students, which I think you can do at a high school level, that's so different than a college level. Because I'm with them, 90 to 100 classroom hours, plus Shabbatons, plus I was a basketball coach, plus their advisor. So the ability to really to impact students, and by extension, their families and a broader community, and give a new model of American Jewish life, a model of pluralism that I always studied academically, it was just too good to pass up. And unfortunately, what I found in the college world is even though I was stimulated intellectually, what I felt was missing a lot was that sense of community. And I think that universities continue to create brilliant scholars. What I feel gets lost often, with some exceptions in the university world, is that everyone's in their own box, their own silo, their own department. Your expertise has to be very, very narrow. And that wasn't what motivated me to do a PhD program at all. I wanted to learn as much as I could. I wanted to meet different people. And I just found that I realized if I continued on that path, it was going to make my view of the world more narrow, not more broad and expansive. So all of that really is what motivated me to be in the high school space and to continue to do work I do now, adult education, consulting, and meeting with a variety of institutions.
And definitely not all also public school or high schools are the same, but I know that Gan Academy, the sense of community, the investment in the students is looking as the citizen of our country. One of the reasons that I am passionate about education, even though my undergrad is political science, the first question is like, what kind of society we want to build? And this will impact what kind of citizen we want to raise. And then education will help in some way to create this citizen. So for me, the holistic approach of what kind of citizen we want to raise and how to create this, it's very important. And your work at Gan Academy, also, I think that if we want something for people to take from it, it's to really look at the individual, not just as a place of the knowledge, but really, again, looking at the heart, head, and hand is we're all, the connection and the knowledge, but how is it coming to the next day? We're not just creating students, we are creating citizens that hopefully will contribute to our society. I know that you didn't go to work in college campuses, but college campuses actually since October 7, it was like a big explosion and surprise to many people. I wasn't surprised, but it was like a big surprise. I saw it kind of bubbling for quite some time, for about 20 years, kind of growing. I see what's going on campuses, but October 7 kind of opened it in a very, for many people, in a surprising way. And we hear students in some of the, leader universities going and chanting, for example, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And when you ask them which river, which sea, they don't even know, many of them. Or to have the understanding, what does it mean Palestine will be free, which mean, okay, river to the sea, the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, but there's a country. What are you doing with the people that live there right now? Every time that I meet a student that they chant it and they want to listen, I said to them, do you know that my parents live there and my siblings? What's your plan for them? If you want to give it to somebody else, what's the plan? To do to them what was done in October 7? Also, when they use the word like intifada without knowing what's an intifada, I was there in Israel during intifada where the buses were exploding, and when I hear this word, immediately I'm like, it's like I'm scared and I'm worried, and to see it like on college campuses here in the US and in Europe, this in many cases liberal that care for freedom and liberal ideas chanting this, it's just like surprising. So I found certain things in universities today, in some of this, when we see the student, that either the students are not asking questions or like, why are we doing? They're just like following. I will give another example, like they use the word of genocide, that Israel is doing genocide without understanding what actually the terminology mean, which what's happening right now, it's not, but to understand. So there is no, when we talk about knowledge, there is not much knowledge from what we see. And there is definitely the hand, what are they doing? Are they becoming aggressive and violence? And this is what like the university is creating. So what did this surprise you? What's your take on it? What do you make of all of this?
I want to build my answer by affirming something you said about the importance of creating citizens through education. Because one of my lines at GAN was often that my classroom, I aimed for it to be a John Dewey inspired experiment in democratic education. And the philosopher John Dewey said the most important purpose of education is to prepare students for democracy. And I would say almost every parent and I, look, a few students will be history majors and maybe some will go into politics, but they'll all be citizens, 100% of them. And my job is to prepare them for that role of citizenship. And that, I think, is exactly what's missing on the college campus. This sense of shared purpose and being in one learning community that a high school can really formulate. Unfortunately, the universities cannot. So unfortunately, I think some of the polarization, people being in their own, literally their own spaces and only affirming their own identity. And of course, college should be a place where one should search their identity. As you heard in my story, I used my senior thesis to understand myself, but I didn't end there. My job was also then to learn from others and to try to figure out how could I learn from others' experiences. And unfortunately, I think the university has lost that ability, with a few positive exceptions that I can mention, to really have a communal discourse, a way to say, we're all here for a key purpose, which is to learn key knowledge from experts in their fields, but also to learn from a diverse array of perspectives. Like, that's the beauty of the American university at its best. And unfortunately, time and time again, in recent times, it's become more a space of people speaking in their own bubbles, echo chambers, almost mirroring what happens on social media and what we know about algorithms. Let me just find the people who affirm my point of view, and I'll find people who would challenge my point of view and think differently. And so, I mean, my hope is that people will learn from the example of some of the universities that have done it better.
Yeah, and I think this approach also from like even from early childhood and up, to really build this kind of citizen. But I know that this wasn't the case in every university.
That's right.
And there are some good examples of universities that are still raising those citizen, more holistic way. Do you have like some examples, from around the country that may be like a beacon of light, during this difficult time and challenging times?
Absolutely. I'll share two models that have been played out at 3 universities in the United States. The first model comes from Dartmouth University, and I want to give Susanna Heschel tremendous credit. And your viewers can find the incredible forum that they put together not long after October 7th, which was a range of professors speaking very calmly, rationally, but also with a lot of depth about how they saw what happened and what it meant within Israel, within surrounding Arab countries, in the Jewish world, in the Muslim world. Now, how did that forum come to be? It wasn't by accident. She had worked prior to that for years to forge relationships among the professors themselves, to be sure they were exchanging different points of view. And that model came through, that they would, of course, then were willing to sit on the stage together, even though they didn't agree about what it meant for October 7th. So modeling deeply among the faculty community in a place like Dartmouth, that's something that I would hope other universities could copy, and it has been a model for the field. The other, I would say, is at the University of Chicago, and which I learned recently was really copied at Vanderbilt University as well, is a real commitment to a couple of concepts. And one thing may seem a little bit funny, but it's the idea of institutional neutrality, which is to say, the university is not going to issue a statement actually after every single incident that happens politically in the world. They want there to be that diversity of points of view. Of course, they want to affirm the safety of their students, but not to come out with this political position, that political position, because they found, in their experience, they found once you do that, then it becomes a tug of war, negotiating game of which group is going to get higher than the other and is going to have the big megaphone on the university campus. They wanted to commit to critical inquiry, open discussion, and again, to go back to what the university does best, bring a diverse group of people together to learn from one another. And I think if the viewers of this conversation look at what the University of Chicago is doing and Vanderbilt both, each of their own way have really emphasized that point. And I think to their credit, I was hearing about stories about Vanderbilt where students are not only intellectually stimulated, but they really are happy and comfortable and learning from one another in this space, rather than other spaces which some describe as being fearful, intimidated to be one's full self. So I'm hopeful that others in the field, other universities, and it may take time because we know educational change takes time, and these are each places where that mission is deeply embedded. And again, they've worked at it for years. I don't expect change overnight, but I do know that college professors and people who lead universities, provosts and deans, do look carefully at what others are doing. And I hope they'll be influenced by models like this, which can bring out the best of what the university can be.
And I hope that more people will listen, to this podcast and will learn from this, because I definitely see the needs. Like, I know that with the teacher union here in Massachusetts, there is lots of push, with some of this curriculum, and which is a problem. It's like, why do we need to push a certain agenda? within, but it's like, as you mentioned, there is a different thing about critical thinking and inquiry, but they don't need to send a statement, because we are a country of immigrants. In every public school and in every universities, you have students from all over the world. I recently was in a conference with the educators from 54 countries. And you hear the stories from each one of them. And I said, like, we are only one, so why focus on this one? And why not looking at what's happening right now in Taiwan, or in Korea, or in Sudan, or in England, or in anywhere in the world? Why this one? Why does the school need to become like a place of expertise? And to choose that. And I think that they were kind of like pushed to it. And I have to say that they were also pushed probably by the Jewish and Israelis, that they felt that the school need to be, kind of being with them in a time of sorrow and a time of a difficult time. And I had lots of conversation with some Israelis that send their kids to public school. And I said, well, the school can send email about everything that's happening. Many kids in your school maybe go through different trauma and different events that you're not even aware. If there's somebody in Nigeria and in the northern of, and other places, I said, like, yes, this is our sorrow, and it's very, very difficult one, but we can expect the school to make it a safe space for our students, a place that maybe they can get a support, but they can't be like politically fine-tuned to give a statement on everything.
Right.
So I think we can definitely, hopefully other public school, Jewish schools, that everybody will learn from these universities. What is the role of the universities? What is the role of the school? What are we doing? I can share you another thing. A couple of years ago, I had like a global group of educators that I was a community of practice. And when I asked them, what kind of citizen are you raising? What are the values? So the educators from England sent them immediately, we have the British values. And they opened this website with the 4 values, and they knew exactly. The educators from Turkey said, we have the Turkish values. And immediately. The American teachers didn't know. The Israeli teachers also didn't know. So it's like, what are we doing? What's our goal? If our goal is to create citizens that are contributing and to the democratic idea, what does it mean?
Right.
Yeah. So Jonathan, I wanted to kind of like have a more like open questions for you. I know that you're doing a lot and with many different organizations. Is there anything in particular that you want to share also with our audience, or something you're working on?
Sure. So just last week, I was excited that a report was released. I helped to finalize through the Center for Jewish Peoplehood Education based in Israel, working with the Jewish Education Project and M Squared, which interviewed over 1,000 educators on the impact of October 7th and what we can learn from that. So I'm going to share, around the conversation, just 2 slides related to that. Of 2 of the key findings. The survey looked at what are the assumptions, what do teachers think about what they're doing in the classroom, and which ones kind of felt most confident that they were achieving their goals, and where did they feel less confident. And I'm happy for other people to read the long report, but the key points were that a combination of, in this case, in a Jewish context, having students understand their Jewish story, connection to their community is one key goal, married to it at the same time to promote complex thinking. And what this survey showed is only 27% chose those as goals, not only chose them as goals, but that they feel they are able to do. As you can see on the screen, so complex thinking is a lot what we've talked about in this conversation. Seeing different points of view, complex thinking, grappling with moral challenges, and so on. But at the same time, feeling some sense of a connection to one's community and to Israel, advocacy, commitment for welfare of others, which are key goals in Jewish institutions. So the question is, what would it look like? How can one promote each of those goals? And so the theory of this report, and I think it really aligns with the work I've always done, which is why I'm excited to be part of the team, is what would it look like to really bring together a sense of Jewish bonding, connection, emotional bonding to others when learning about Israel, to their community, a broader welfare, a bigger purpose, a bigger goal, while being able to instill the kind of complex thinking and approaches to the world to build relationships with those in difference, that's what we believe going forward is going to lead to constructive Jewish engagement. So in my own career, I've been able to do this in each of the smaller institutions I've been a part of, but I'm hoping to do that again at a broader scale, thanks to this report and my continual teaching in the field. And it makes me think a lot about one of my dear colleagues at the Hartman Institute who teaches there is Tal Becker, who's been a longtime negotiator for the Israeli government, one of the architects of the Abraham Accords that brought relationships between Israel, Bahrain, the UAE, and Morocco, and hopefully will bring others. And what he said is, what does transformative education look like? Like this, he said, it's like putting on a new pair of glasses. How can you see the world? And when you try different frameworks and paradigms, how does it help you to see the world differently and grow as a person, grow in learning and community? And so I hope my contribution has been through the heart, head, hand, and connection knowledge stance approaches, as well as these other approaches that are really trying to find what is that sweet spot that brings together both that individual identity, storytelling, and building with understanding the complexity of the world and be able to think about that.
Yeah, thank you. And I can't wait to see, how this will impact and go behind, and definitely the complex thinking, because very often people think black and white. Right. And it is like bad, we just, have the new election, and you see some people that are very excited and some people that are terrified. And how can they look at it if there is something in between? There is gray, there is many different colors. It's not just black and white. And how can we create this as part of a conversation that it's important? I wanted one more question. I know that you spoke Sure. about the heart, head, and hand model. I know that very often we see that people choose as their hand as going and protesting today. What are some maybe next ideas we can tell them? Not just about protesting, because protesting in very often it's also calling other people to do the work. What would you maybe share or advise young people that are looking at the situation, and maybe it's the Middle East, but looking at things in the country, with their heart, some people feeling one way, with their head they're learning. What are some maybe ways that you chose to take, or maybe you can advise them?
Sure. So heart, head, hand is a very intentional order of how to think about things. And when I run the discussions, I always run it in that order. And when advising students, as I've had the privilege to do for many years, I also have them think about it. What is it that you're passionate about? What is your story? What is it you want to understand? Your sense of purpose in the world. Then what do you need to know to fulfill that purpose? And when you put the heart and head together, you know what to do with your hands. So protests, for sure, can be a means to the end, but too often, I think in our time, it's become the end in and of itself. So the question is, well, protest to what end? What is it that you're hoping to achieve? So in my own life, I had this interesting moment that COVID really created for me. Being home all the time, as we all were, not being able to be at work, I tuned into local government in part because I wanted to know about my son's local public school. What is it going to be open the next day? How are they going to think about the health issues? How are they processing it? And many people have this experience. Around the same time, I read this incredible book called Politics for Power by Professor Eitan Hirsch of Tufts University, who challenged the reader to say, if you just took 1 hour a week, and rather than reposting things from Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc., gave back to your local community, how could you change the world, or even just change your own life in a small way? And I thought, well, I've always taught this John Dewey idea of democratic education, citizenship. Do I actually practice what I preach? And I realized, well, I'm lucky in Brookline and in New England, we have this institution called town meeting where people can run for local office and be involved really directly in the affairs of the community. So as of 2021, I was elected, and I am now one of 255 town meeting members in Brookline, where I live, where I do vote on all kinds of issues and advocate for them related to climate change and housing and the schools and civic engagement, a whole variety of topics. And I found for me that that really was a natural extension of what I do, because I've always loved politics, been interested in history, been interested in teaching about civics. So to be directly involved, even in my last year again, I brought to a current events class, I would bring to the students some of my upcoming votes to say, here's what I'm wrestling with. Here are the two sides. What questions would you ask me? How would you vote? How should I think about it? And so my hope would be for any students or citizens in the world to say, given your life story and what you've done both personally and professionally? What is it that you can give back and contribute? And I think it's some of the most valuable work we can do. And we're lucky in a country like the United States, which really does value that sense of communal contribution. Because I think back to your story about the Global Educator Seminar, how hard it was for the Americans to think on a national scale. But it should be easier on a local scale at a minimum to say, in our neighborhood, in our community, and that is how American schools are organized, what are our values in the community in which we live? And how do we want to instill them in others? And what role can we play in shaping them and bringing them to reality for our community?
Thank you, Jonathan. And unless you have any other comments or questions, is there anything else you want to share?
I just want to say I'm so delighted to have had this conversation with you, and for all who have listened, I invite you to reach out to me, heartstance.org. You can find my website, learn more about my work. I'm always happy to be in dialogue with individuals thinking about doing this work, with institutions who would like thought partnership. Really great privilege to be here today. Thank you.
And I would like to thank you, Jonathan, first of all, for joining us today and sharing from your experience, but also to thank you for everything that you do and this approach that you developed and your very important work, to make this world a better world. So thank you again for joining us for Education in Time of War. Today was a conversation with me, Rachel Raz, with Dr. Jonathan Golden, from a founder of the HeartStance Education Consulting. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you.